Hello to everyone joining. See them coming in. Give it 30 seconds to welcome everyone.
Gotta love Zoom.
I know, right? So natural.
Tutti and Pacina, everybody in the pool.
It's working its magic. There we go.
And the great thing is we're recording it so everyone can spread this around so we can create more wellness in the world.
Exactly. I can watch myself back and cringe. All right, we will kick it off. Welcome everyone. My name is Amanda Giddin and I lead marketing and community for Monument. And I am thrilled to be joined here today by none other than Andrew Zimmerman. You know him from TV. He's an Emmy and four-time James Beard Award-winning TV personality, chef, writer, teacher, advocate, and so much more. Thank you so much for being here today, Andrew.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And the way that this works, if you're new to Monument Live, I will jump in with a few questions for Andrew that members have shared with me or I've come up with myself, and then we will also open it up to Q&A. You can see that there is a Q&A chat button at the bottom here, and if you write in that chat box, Andrew and I will see your questions and we'll make sure to address them as the session goes on. So without further ado, we're going to dive right in. For those of you who are new or new-ish to Monument, we are an online treatment platform for those looking to change their relationship with alcohol. And we do that by connecting folks to each other via community programming like Monument Live, via therapist-moderated support groups, an anonymous forum, and to affordable medical care if you're looking for more holistic support. And if you've been on the
last one?
To affordable medical care if you're looking for more
affordable medical care.
You got my talking points there. Yeah, so therapists and physicians who are specialized in treating alcohol use disorder and helping people make progress.
I just like underlining really important stuff.
Yes, affordable medical care, exclamation point, bold, underline, right there with you. So if you're not so new to the platform, you've heard us talk a lot about this idea of your relationship to alcohol and how like human relationships are often evolving, complex, super personal. So Andrew, I'd love to hear from you a little context on how you developed your relationship with alcohol early on and how that evolved over time.
Alcohol and I were like Bogart and Bacall in Casablanca. The moment we were in the same room together, there was an electric attraction. I had my first taste of alcohol when I was a young kid, and I absolutely loved it. And it started a 5-6 year habit of sneaking sips out of my dad's drink that I would make for him when he came home from work at the end of the day. I loved making his scotch and soda and filling it up in the glass a little too high so that I had to take a little sip and walk it to him. That was in the late 60s, early 70s. And I knew what alcohol and drugs could do for me. I knew I didn't use these words then, but I knew the emotional disconnect. I knew the suppression of my thoughts and feelings that would come with using. And when family tragedy happened in the summer of 1974, and I got home from summer camp to find my mother in a coma, I knew exactly what I needed to do to stop feeling the horrific things that I was feeling. And despite the entire world that I was in sending messages to me, we love you, we're here to talk, this is a safe place to share what's going on inside. I listened to none of that. I rejected all of it. Much like later on when I cratered my life and people were throwing me life jackets as I was drowning. I was tossing them back in the boat because I didn't like the color orange. Even at the age of 13, I really thought I knew best. And my best thinking was, let me go, into the liquor cabinet and drink. Let me order booze from the liquor store. This is the early 70s in New York City when you could, a kid could get on the phone and family had a house charge at the liquor store and they delivered within an hour. Same thing with the pharmacy downstairs. There was a pharmacy in our building on the ground floor. And I got into chemicals and booze, hard and heavy right away. I bought weed for the first time that summer. I think just a few short days after I got back from summer camp, and my using really took off. And just like everything in my life, even the way I am today, my superpower is to make everything expensive and unwieldy. So the first thing that I did was, steal a couple $100 from the envelope behind the silverware caddy in the kitchen that my father had kept there for emergencies, and went to Central Park and met up with a guy that a friend of mine hooked me up with. And I bought a quarter pound of dope to sell 3/4 of it and return the money back to the envelope so no one knew what was going on, and then have the rest for myself. And it was that pattern of using in the first month after I got home that literally just repeated itself over and over and over again until I sobered up on January 28th of 1992. What's interesting to me is that while the thoughts and feelings about alcohol continued, the relationship with alcohol intensified, and it became almost it became my necessity. I needed it like air to breathe. It was my sole methodology for functioning and to address the world, was to be in a constant state of inebriation of one kind or another. And my consequences got worse. My life cratered, over and over and over and over and over again. We just kept, the doors kept opening and I kept hitting the down button on the elevator. It was like Dante's, circles of hell. I just kept descending and descending until finally in, January of 1992, mid-January, I decided that life just wasn't worth living anymore, that I was a failure. I had lost an entire decade of the 80s. And I went into a flophouse hotel in New York City and, tried to kill myself. And, I woke up, came to 3-4 days later. It's sort of unclear. We know it was at least 3, but no more than 5. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have that ace bandage of anxiety around my chest that I woke up with every single morning. And I did something I had never done in my whole life. I called someone and I asked for help. And it was that opening of the door, bringing a third person into my relationship with alcohol, that saved my life.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And, you started saying my relationship with alcohol or my breakup with alcohol, and we actually invited our community to write a letter to alcohol to kind of reflect on that. So a lot of that personification definitely comes through. And that third party can be so important, which is, a lot of what we're building at Monument.
It's crucial. When I sobered up, it wasn't my first time at treatment. Look, in my, tawdry descent, my using war stories, arrests, jail, detoxes, psych wards, treatment, inpatient and outpatient. It was a really ugly, low bottom story. But what was fascinating to me was I too had to write a letter to my taboos when I was in many treatments, and also in the treatment that kickstarted this sobriety almost 29 years ago. But it is the insidiousness of the relationship that we keep stuffing and we hide despite the fact that I went from someone who would deny that I had a problem to someone in the last 5-6 years of my using that told you to go screw yourself, I don't care what you know, there was still so much of it that I kept private. So many of the things that I did that I would never cop to. So much of the stuff, there was so much stigma and shame and guilt attached to the things I did, the people I hurt, the things I did to myself, the opportunities lost, the grieving that was going on in my own life, the trauma that I had endured, even going back to my earliest days of childhood, that it was really the opening up to another human being and sharing my experience is what was necessary for me to take that first step into recovery and changing my relationship with alcohol and drugs. And when people, I'm hit up every day on social media about how to start, what to do, I'm in trouble, what can I do? I'm very public about my recovery, and I'm a very public and proud recovering alcoholic and addict. And I always tell them the absolute first thing to do, unless you're in a medical emergency, in which case you should call the police or a hospital, some emergency services personnel. The first thing you have to do is call another person and tell them you need help. That is the first step.
Definitely. And, you know, we've seen so many members taking that first step, and whether it's anonymously or publicly, something that we want everyone to feel really proud of, you know, if not day one, you know, day 10, year 10.
Oh, hey, don't get me wrong. When I sobered up, I was just a run-of-the-mill alcoholic addict with a low bottom story. I was a user of people and a taker of things. I also wasn't the person that people know today. I was unlovable, unemployable, a hopeless mess. And I didn't become quote unquote public with my recovery until I had a platform to do so. And at that point, I made the very firm decision that I was going to publicly engage with this, because I knew that I had the ability, you know, and there's no polite or kind way to say this that doesn't make me look like a complete and total jerk. So I hope everyone takes it with a grain of salt. But once my platform got big enough and I had a TV show in 170 countries and I was doing interviews and stuff, and people were asking me really personal questions about my life, rather than avoiding them, I decided to embrace my truth and use that to be a forceful change for good in the world. And right on up to saying yes to you guys when you contacted me. It's something that I spend a large part of time every day doing. I'm very active in the recovery community on a daily basis today, currently, and I've never stopped for 28 plus years.
It's amazing. Phil, thank you so much for that. I know that it opens so many doors for a lot of people, whether, you know, they've identified a rock bottom or whether they just want to take a look at their drinking. And I'd love to hear from you in those earlier days, how you had some of those harder conversations, you know, working in the hospitality world where alcohol shows up quite frequently. How did you kind of create those boundaries with folks in the industry or start having those conversations before you went out, you know, far and wide on your platform?
It's, you know, everyone has their own recovery story. Mine is mine, and people can take what they need and leave the rest. I went to treatment. Treatment sent me to a halfway house. That halfway house had requirements: attendance of 12-step meetings, getting a sponsor, getting a job, by the way, that was a 9-to-5 job that you could just leave, that you didn't take back home to the house with you, and that allowed you the freedom to attend the meetings and the house activities that they believe were necessary. The first 6 months of my recovery, I turned my will and my life over to the care of the Hazelden continuum of excellence that truly helped me, and the people of Minnesota who loved me up when I definitely did not feel lovable. I had identified someone early on as somebody who I wanted to help be my sponsor in the 12-step program of my choosing. I asked him to be my sponsor. He's still my sponsor today. He said something to me once, and I really forget it was a very small issue, very small problem that I went to him with. And his response was, "The truth will set you free." Now, sometimes total disclosure is not always necessary. It may be hurtful to another human being, or it may put you in a position that might hurt yourself or someone else. So I'm really glad that I had someone with experience that I could talk to about these things, because some moments they were really easy to be truthful in, others less so. And it really does depend what your industry is. I would also say that in 2020, there was a lot more patience, tolerance, and understanding about chemical dependency, alcoholism, drug addiction, and other isms than there was even in the early 90s when I sobered up. I went on my very first job interview, and someone asked me, what brought you to Minnesota, since the city of my birth was New York. It's where I worked. It's where I lived, spent the first 30 years of my life there. And I decided to tell the truth. I had experience doing that a couple days earlier when I was in front of a judge in St. Paul, Minnesota, because I had to answer for charges when I got out of treatment that had followed me from New York City to Minnesota. And I had told the people in my life here that I was going to fib so that I could make sure that I didn't wind up in the workhouse or jail or worse. And they said, no. You have to, again, my sponsor said very wisely, invest in the loss, tell the truth. You need to begin to live your life on a different basis than you lived it before. So the shucking and jiving, the lying and fibbing that had defined my life previous to sobering up had to change. And there was no equivocating. It meant complete and total reliance on a different way of life, right? A spiritual way of life. And so I had to test my faith that if I was truthful, things would be okay. It might not go my way, but ultimately I would look back and judge it as being worth it, and that I was okay. And so that's what I did. And I told the judge what I was doing, what my situation was, and what my hopes were. And that judge gave me an ACD, an action and contemplation of dismissal, and said, stay sober and keep your nose out of trouble, and all this will go away. And I did. And the spiritual awakening that I had at that moment, when I actually put someone else's advice to the test, solidified some of my belief that this new way of living could actually work out. The next opportunity at that job interview, when I was asked, what are you doing here? And I was able to truthfully tell them. And when they said things like, when are you available to work? Well, if you don't have a job and you need to support yourself, the first words out of anyone's mouth usually are, oh, all the time, whatever you need. Well, work was not my number one priority. Recovery was my priority. I had already made that decision. And so consequently, I told them, hey, these are the days I can work. These are the nights that I can work. The rest of my time, I have to be available to do the stuff that I need to do to stay healthy and well. Thinking, of course, that would mean I would not get the job. It turns out that telling the truth, standing up for yourself, asking for what you need, being vulnerable is impressive to other people. And the voice inside my head that's often not telling me the truth was just my unhealthy self saying, oh, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And that little faint voice in the background that said, don't worry, it's going to be okay, was telling me to tell the truth. Well, it wound up being okay. And it's taken, almost 3 decades, but now that healthy voice inside of myself is very easy for me to connect with. In fact, I was just speaking with somebody about this issue earlier today. I don't really ever disconnect from that healthy voice anymore. I maintain a constant contact and dialogue with that healthy self. And it's that faint little voice that's always there is actually my unhealthy self. So it's completely flipped around 29 years later.
That's great. But we can all hope for that, having a stronger connection to that positive voice. And we actually had a member submit this question. They were wondering, given stressors, potential triggers, the state of the world is enough to, cause anxiety for most. How do you kind of
For
suppress
all, for
for
all.
all, for all? Yes, I'd like to meet someone who doesn't feel that way. How do you, stay tuned in with that positive voice in light of those stressors?
Well, it's a little easier almost 29 years into my journey. I regularly attend 12-step meetings. I work that program on a daily basis. I do service work on a daily basis. I have a spiritual practice and habits that I do many times a day. And so the my ability at almost 29 years clean to match serenity to whatever calamity comes at me is now a fairly well-oiled machine. That was not always the case. I remember being in a car with some of my buddies. We were coming home from a meeting. We were driving back to the halfway house that we all lived in. And someone said, oh, I want to stop and buy a pack of cigarettes. And those were the days when there were cigarette machines in bars in Minnesota and cigarette packs behind the bar in the bars and saloons in Minnesota. And I had said to them, oh, I want one too. I smoked at the time, and I started handing money. He said, come in with me. And I literally started shaking. The idea of walking in to a room where there was alcohol in it at whatever I was, 7, 8, 9 weeks sober was an impossibility for me at the time, an absolute impossibility. I don't recommend this for newcomers or those still struggling with these issues. But today, because I take my medicine every single day, I'm around it all the time. I own restaurants that there's booze. I have my own car. I could drive, if I choose to, I can drive to the liquor store when I hang up with you. But I'm not worried about drinking today because I've taken my medicine and I feel very far away from a drink or a drug today. This is a one day at a time deal, even for people with long-term sobriety. I can wake up tomorrow morning and the dog could die and the woman leaves and the job says you're fired and the house burns down. And I mean, all these things can happen at once. Life is sometimes like that. And so I cling very tightly to my recovery on a daily basis and practice it on a daily basis so that it's on those bad days that I have the tools ready at my disposal to match that calamity with some inner serenity. Someone once gave me a great metaphor, and that was, the really good basketball players, right? The great free throw shooters. Steph Curry, often is interviewed and, his father tells stories of him shooting 1,000 balls a night from the free throw line, right? And the reason that they do that is so that when there's no time left on the clock and it's a tie game, you can walk up to the line and win the NBA championship. There's no doubt in your mind, you're going to make that shot. And you make 9 out of 10 of them during the season. And the reason is because you practice it so much that it almost becomes second nature to you. The noise of the crowd tunes out. The size of the moment shrinks. It's not the NBA championship. I'm back in the driveway shooting hoops. And that's very much how it is for people in long-term sobriety who have dealt with emotional sobriety and emotional recovery, who do the things in their life to stay nimble and deft with the tools that are at our disposal. In recovery, people always talk about that set of tools to use all the time, like call someone and talk, right? That's a tool, right? Do some breathing and meditation, another tool. Do something for another human being, another tool. Get up and leave the room, a very effective tool.
Very effective. Yep.
Once those become habit, you don't even think about it. And I'm blessed and grateful and lucky that has come my way. I will also say, and I think it's important given the people who are listening in our community, it does take work. You get out of it what you put into it. I so desperately today do not want to go back to that hellhole that I crawled out of in January of 1992. You can have my seat in the recovery rooms when you pry it from my cold dead fingers. I mean, that is, I will kill for that seat, metaphorically. That's how important it is to me. So when someone says, hey, you got to do A, B, C, and D every day, I'm like, okay. I mean, I was so beaten down when I crawled into recovery. I did everything that I was told. Now, I don't say that to pat myself on the back. I actually say it to comparatively stick that Andrew up against the Andrew of 6 months earlier, who never would take advice from someone else, who would do nothing that anyone told him to do, who was self-centeredness run rampant. But that changed once I took those first couple steps and decided that this was going to be my life.
Right. And I'd love to hear your perspective on, and I know that this might feel truer to your earlier story and, you know, climbing the culinary ranks in New York City, about this idea of the high functioning drinker. Sure. And, you know, we've seen in our community that a lot of folks feel like that's been a barrier to seeking support because they haven't hit that rock bottom or their drinking isn't bad enough. So based on your experience in the recovery community and your personal experience, what advice would you give to those people who are kind of navigating that decision to reach out or call that third person in the relationship, to use your words?
It was a barrier for me. I was very high functioning. I would, you know, kick ass at work for 3-4 days in a row and then disappear for 48 hours. Binging, arrests, whatever. The places that I worked took me back because I was very good at what I did. And I performed a function that other people could not do. So those places that employed me should have fired me right away. Today, there's a lot less tolerance for it because everybody knows what it looks like. Right. But for someone struggling and in that place, what I would have told my younger self 4 or 5 years before I sobered up, I would have reminded my younger self that this is a progressive disease that kills people. It's jails, institutions, and death. Sometimes not in that order. Sometimes it's institutions, jails, and death. Most often it's jails, institutions, jails, institutions, jails, institutions, jails, institutions, death. But it only goes one way. It only gets worse. And I could have, when I look back at my own story, which I've written a lot, done a lot of inventory, done a lot of work on myself, the one thing that comes screaming out of there is, had I not acted using fear-based thinking, had I embraced the help other people were giving me, had I listened, I would have spared myself a ton of personal harm. I would have spared myself a ton of horrific hurt that I imposed on other people. And I would have saved myself a lot of trauma work, a lot of amends work. It does not get better. It only gets worse. Oftentimes when I tell people my story and I'm sharing with someone who is, you know, on the fence, they push back a little. And I tell them, I mean, look, you know, it's up to you. You know, let me know how it works out. Get back to me. My number is always open to you. But the staggering thing for most alcoholics and addicts is that they rarely do what I call the most important experiment of all, which is, okay, no pressure. You're on the fence? Great. Try an experiment. Just on your own, Just stop and wait and see how long it takes for you to go back to your bottle, to your drug of choice, to your ism, whatever that is, right? And when you are listening to that voice, when that voice inside your head says, nope, got to have a drink, note that. Note what that feels like. Be aware and cognizant of that. See how quickly it happens. Because if you're a real alcoholic or an addict, that time, you may white knuckle it 24 hours. My experience personally was I could not. But very soon after, you're going to be put in the position where you convince yourself that you have no choice but to use. That is your illness talking.
Right. And, you say that self-challenge. Our CEO and co-founder, Mike, identified as a binge drinker, and he says he failed 100% of those nights where he said, I'm not going to drink tonight. But because it was so infrequent, he feel like he didn't identify with the word alcoholic, and that was kind of his barrier. I would love to hear your perspective on terminology. At Monument, we actually don't use the word alcoholic because we found that some people don't identify with it. So I'd love to hear from you. Did you accept that phrase or identify with that phrase very early on? And how has your kind of identity and sense of self evolved?
No, I didn't identify with that right away, although I knew that it was true. I knew by definition I was an alcoholic and an addict. I just thought alcoholics and addicts were, street people and folks who, lived in abandoned buildings and stole to make ends meet and hustled on the streets. Meanwhile, I was doing all those things. So my own self-appraisal was fairly weak at the time. Over the course of my sobriety, the first 10 years, I really believed there was one way to get clean, period, full stop. Then the next 10 years, I felt there was a lot of gray area. The last 9 years, I have learned a few valuable lessons. One of them is I really don't care how anyone gets well. I really don't care what they choose to call their program, their higher power, their disease, their anything. All I care about is that if you are suffering from this horrific disease of mind, body, and spirit, and it is a mental illness, a physical disease, and a spiritual soul sickness, all rolled into one. If you are, like me, one of those people, abstinence is the only thing that works. The problem is we have a disease that tells us we don't have a disease. We have a struggle, just like your co-founder's story. I did the same thing 1,000 times. I said, I'm not doing this tomorrow. And there I was the next day, right back where I started from. That's part of that's part of that soul sickness and that mental health issue, right? Those dark mental blank spots. And so I would just encourage people, it doesn't matter how you do it, but I do know this, there are much easier ways than white knuckling it and doing it on your own. I have friends who were drug addicts using when I was using, and circumstances, various ones, led them to become clean. And once clean and distanced from their drug of choice, they realized, wow, I was physically a drug addict, but I'm able to not use. And they've not used for decades. And they're very happy, joyous, and free. That was not my story.
Right.
You take away, for me, take away my chemicals, my booze, my other isms, and I am still the lying, cheating, hopeless, lonely, messed up person making bad decisions. I'm just a dry drunk. And so I needed recovery in the full sense of the word. Some people need to be rehabilitated. I needed to be habilitated. I did not know how to live. I had a very low bottom and had been using alcoholically since I was 13 years old. And so and my behaviors were alcoholic before then. So I had stunted my growth. I needed the full, the full Monty of cures.
Mm-hmm.
I really, for people who quibble with terminology, and I say this respectfully to those out there listening who do, I think you're just lying to yourself. I think you're running a scam on yourself. I think it's your disease talking inside of yourself. Who cares what the terminology is? Who cares what other people think? Do you want to live? Do you want to be happy? Do you want to have, all the promises of a fulfilling and meaningful life to come true for you? You're not going to be able to do it if you're a slave to alcohol and or drugs. It's just not going to happen. There's no one I know who's been able to make that work. And so I find some of those ideas to be just alcoholic grandstanding. I do believe that, for example, there are 12-step programs that rely on certain literature that was written almost 100 years ago by a lot of, white middle-class men, right? I've heard from women that the language in some of that literature is sexist. I've heard from people that some of that literature that uses the word God is a bar to accepting some of the truths that are in that literature. I accept that. I understand that. And I know it. I believe those feelings are valid. It was not for me. And the reason it wasn't for me is that when I brought up those things to people, I was just excuse making. And the people said to me, fine, ignore those words. Take what you need and leave the rest. And that was the best advice anyone ever gave me. 4 or 5 years into the thing, I had accepted all of it because I didn't pay attention to the stuff that I took what I need and I left the rest behind. And I think and it's why I was so eager to come here and talk today, because, I love the idea that what Monument is doing is providing a safe place for everyone who wants to change their relationship with alcohol. Along the way, a lot of people who change their relationship with alcohol move on into sobriety, looks, smells, and tastes like mine, or move on to sobriety that's completely different than mine, but they move on to sobriety.
Definitely.
And that's different than being dry. I think moving on to sobriety is about choosing personal wellness and choosing health and selflessness over disease and selfishness. And people struggle with a lot of the terminology, and that's okay. That's okay. But keep coming back.
Definitely. The same idea that, everyone deserves a door to walk through, whatever that door is, come on in. And you're not alone when you enter. And a couple questions from the audience. One is about the idea of community. The question is if you've ever fought with or coped with isolation in this journey, which is very relevant because of what's going on in the world. And I know we've seen in our community that a lot of people kind of recognized their unhealthy drinking through quarantine.
A lot of my isolation was self-imposed before I sobered up and during parts of my sobriety, even going back just a handful of single digits of years. I've struggled with other mental health issues. I've been very public about that. It's not easy. It's not a straight line of, you put a cork in a bottle and then just everything takes off and it's magic. Life is fired at point blank range. Horrific things happen. We slide back and start using old responses to what we think are new problems, but they're just the same old problems. And so, I have, and then I have to kick myself in the butt. One of the things and one of the reasons why I like community recovery, whether it's one like yours, whether it's one like the 12-step groups that I attend, is that after a while, you're so plugged in to one or the other, right? That you, even when you choose not to work that program, the program comes and works you. Example, if I kind of disappeared for a couple days, the loved ones in my life, my recovering friends, my work colleagues, I mean, there is a whole huge population of people that would be like, where are you? What are you doing? And then there's other people, because I've been transparent. Forget about the celebrity stuff. Forget about me doing stuff like this. Because everyone in my workplace, my office, this is one room in our office, it's our kitchen studio where I shoot a lot of TV and stuff. And our production office is down the corner, our hospitality, where we have this big sort of warehousey space. It's pretty cool. All those people know that I'm a recovering addict and alcoholic. Everyone does. If I disappeared, I think for 12 hours, I think some of the people who've worked with me, well, one person in particular for 18 years, would literally come to my house because they would think that I'd fallen and couldn't get up.
Right,
exactly. It just starts working you. For those that are early on in recovery and suffering from that because of quarantine, my heart is breaking for you. I sponsor a lot of guys in my 12-step group, and I say guys not to be sexist. I just believe that, you know, as a man, I should sponsor other men. I have sponsored women who at one point started out biologically as women, but now identify as men. And there is a gender issue there that I believe I owe my experience, strength, and hope to whoever is asking for it, but that has special circumstances. So when I say the word guys, I'm not saying that in a sexist way. I actually literally mean other men. I have people who are in relatively early recovery or were stopped doing meetings and stuff and got, you know, they've been sober for a while, then just dry for a while, and now they're kind of back into it. And one of the great struggles right now is what we do with people in early recovery who are choosing to embrace the principles of recovery, but have to do it over Zoom and stuff. Right. That is, wow, is that a heavy duty thing? It's so hard. The physical connecting with other people was such a big part of my sobriety. You know, the meetings and all that was fine. It was having a cup of coffee with someone. It was taking a walk around the lake and talking to another recovering person. It was sitting around and bullshitting on the street and laughing and just having a good time in early recovery that got me from point M to O, you know? And so in working with some people early on about this, you know, I told them they sort of have to manufacture their own syllabus. They have to create their own mechanisms. And I'm a big fan of writing stuff down. So if you need to put a Post-it on a visor with a little spring hanging in front of you that says, you know, call 3 people every day, take a walk every day, you know, whatever it is that you need to do to break out of that doldrum, write it down and talk to another person about it and say, hey, what can I do? And come up with a list with another person, because, you know, early on, my own best thinking was incapable of coming up with a solution for that.
Right. And, you know, in the Monument community, we do make those connections and through our virtual support groups, and also recognize the power of that in-person connection and routine building. And we actually have a question from one of our attendees about routine. And when you stop drinking and were confronted with time, you know, a new social life, did you replace those moments, those urges with activities, with food? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, well, a lot of it was very unhealthy. I
Mm-hmm.
gained a lot of weight. I started smoking a lot of cigarettes. I started, over dating. I mean, just you name it, I did it. And gradually, one by one, because I was living recovery in a community with other people, and I was being transparent with them. Uh, it was recommended to me, go to a gym. So I joined the Y. And because of special circumstances, the small amount of money I was making, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it turned out that my membership was waived, right? I had just gone in and asked. It turned out that they waived memberships. So I had a place to go do stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely hard in the winter here in Minnesota when outdoors on many days is not really an option. It's pretty cold here.
Right.
So yeah, I had to actually make lists of things to do. One of my friends very early on, said to me, "You only do things you're good at," and I immediately got very mad. And they said, "No,
Does
really?"
that feel true to you?
Oh, it was spot on. And they, I read a lot of, weighty tomes. I cooked. I did crossword puzzles. I did all this stuff that I was good at. And they said, "Why don't you do something new that you've never done before every week?" So I immediately said, "Well, I can't afford to do that." And they said, "Who said anything about something that costs money?"
Right.
And little by little, I started doing that. And it actually, all these years later, has become both an extremely beneficial thing for me, and also a current issue that I'm struggling with. I say yes to everything. I do so many things that I had to enlist the help. I asked for help from the people that I work with to help me develop metrics for what to say no to, when to discard things that aren't working, and use the same sort of decision-making I learned in early sobriety with work. And
Right.
so that started about 10 years ago. At that point, I'm like 19 years sober. I'm on TV. I own businesses. I mean, like, it was, I had to literally go back to the first week I was sober, but instead of alcohol being my problem, it was my relationship with work. So I use those same tools again.
Right.
I mentioned the word sobriety, and I saw someone put up something in the chat about the difference between sobriety and being dry. When you're dry, you've simply put a cork in the bottle. You haven't addressed the other issues associated with alcoholism and drug addiction. Now, you have to assume at that point that you are either an alcoholic or a drug addict, or have some other identifiable ism. If you don't, what are you doing here, right? Then the problem might be something else. And you got to explore that with people. It's another reason why I think the Monument model does a lot of good for people, because not everyone belongs in a 12-step group, right? It might not be their issue. It might be another issue masquerading as alcoholism, for example. But being sober means actually having that change of life sufficient to maintain recovery and to progress in your development of your wellness program. For me, that's a very, very important distinction. I don't want to be just dry. I want the gold ring. And it's too miserable. Being dry, white knuckling it for a real alcoholic, too hard.
And I think, to your point about addressing the underlying, whether it's a co-occurring condition, you mentioned trauma earlier on, is a big part of what we're looking to do, which is why we connect our members to therapists and have that as a piece of our treatment program. But I'd love to go back to kind of because we have so many folks in the community and early in this process. Can you speak a little bit about those first 6 months after you were in rehab, and addressing some of those feelings of trauma, potentially of grief, and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, I didn't know them at the time.
Right.
I just
Or
didn't know.
when did those come to the surface in a meaningful way?
Well, they came to the surface right away. And they
Mm-hmm.
came to the surface right away in a meaningful way. I just didn't have the language or understanding or the ability to
Right.
do anything about it. It's triage, right? Um, I I did an inventory and shared that with someone in treatment. I did another one with my 12-step sponsor in my first year of sobriety. I did another one every single year after that, sometimes more than one in a year. I made
Mm-hmm.
progress all the time. I've never stopped working and reworking and going through the steps in my 12-step program. I thought that I had dealt with the trauma of what happened when I came home at age 13
Right.
from my summer camp to find my mother in a coma. I was living with my mother at the time. My parents were divorced. Um, and in those days, they used oxygen tents. So as a 13-year-old boy, I was picked up at the airport returning from summer camp in August of 1974 by my father and my uncle, something that never happened. The two of them were together
Mm-hmm.
5 times a year on days that were called holidays uh, or someone's birthday. They did not live in the same city. So immediately I was suspicious, and they tried to explain to me what had happened to my mother. I walked into the hospital room. My mother was in a coma in an oxygen tent. So, you know, my father walked me back from the hospital to my mother's apartment where I lived, where all my stuff was. And he told me that he would, you know, and we had spent the whole afternoon and evening together, and with my uncle and, you know, with family friends. And there was a lot of help offered to me, all of which I refused. And my father, using the best wisdom that he had available to him at the time, you know, my dad, you know, was the greatest generation guy. He had, you know, 3 years in the Navy in World War II, helped start a business in New York City, very successful. And he was very much into operationalizing. And he was not a guy who co-regulated and then operationalized. He just told me what the operation was going to look like. And what the
Right.
operation was going to look like was, your mother's apartment is closer to school. Your friends are all here. I live on the other side of town. I'll be here every night after work, and we'll spend a couple hours. You'll live here. There'll be someone in the home to make sure that stuff is shopped for, and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay. And basically what he was telling me was that I was going to be the world's latchiest latchkey kid. And, you know, I started using almost right away that night. I mean, that was the night I went into the liquor cabinet for the first time. One of the things that was really important to me was my relationship with my dad. He was my hero. I looked up to him above all other people. I did a ton of 4th and 5th step work around this, a ton of work with therapists around this, a ton of work on my relationship with my father. And I felt that all my issues with my dad were neatly codified, put in boxes with neat bows, and up in the attic of my life, never to be touched again, dealt with. And I found myself at 23, 24, 25 years sober, struggling heavily in some big areas of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it was suggested to me by a therapist that I went back to see, because I was doing everything right. I'm like, what's going on? Why am I acting out this way over here? Why is this old behavior coming in over here? Why is nothing that I'm doing working out? Why do I feel so unsettled? I haven't had free-floating anxiety in my life for decades, and now I'm living, breathing it every single day, all day. And they suggested that I talk to a trauma person. I did a private trauma intensive down at a community called Onsite in Tennessee. And that got me started. and I got a trauma specialist to work with a little bit, and they helped me uncover some other stuff. And that led me to my second go round doing a 5-day program at the Rio retreats at the Meadows on trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Went out there and did that. And the first day, you know, you fill out all these forms, so the therapists and the counselors know a little bit about you. And Bill, the counselor, says to me, your dad's your hero. And I was, oh yeah. And I went off for 10 minutes about how fantastic my father was. And he says, so how do you feel about the fact that your hero, the person you put up on a pedestal above all others, abandoned you when you were 13 years old? And I was like, abandoned me? What are you, crazy? My dad did this and this and this and sacrificed X and Y and Z. And I got all up in his face. And he looked at me and he said, I don't know. He says, it seems to me that, he said, would you do that to your son? Your son's not quite that age, but if your son was 13 and something like that happened to his mother, would you leave him alone in a house with strangers? And I, oh, absolutely. And I started shucking and jiving and moving, and I started to feel the volcano inside of me, the emotional volcano inside of me. And it became something that I worked on for a solid year, including the 5 days there at Rio Retreat. Because in fact, I had never accepted the simple truth that my father could be my hero and a person that I love and adore above all others, but that he also abandoned me when I was 13 and didn't fulfill his promise of taking care of me as a child. It doesn't mean that I don't think he did the best thing he could under the circumstances or tried his best. He was trying his best. He wasn't trying to hurt me. But words matter. We talked before about words that don't matter, labels, but there are other words that do matter. And it is okay with me today to have my father on a pedestal and at the same time know that I was abandoned when and it caused me a lot of trauma. And once I did that, I took some of those boxes down out of the attic. I had to rummage through them. I had to change some stuff around, clean up some stuff and box it all up and put it back. But I haven't felt that free-floating anxiety or some of those other consequences. I haven't acted out the way that I did back then in the same way since. I think that it's really, really powerful to understand that there are many phases of recovery over one's lifetime, and it comes in many shapes and sizes, and we have to be open to it. And I hate to be a broken record, but boy, oh boy, the one thing it all has in common is being transparent with someone. And I'm not talking about my buddies that co-sign my bullshit and whatever I say, they're all like, great idea. I mean, people who really challenge my way of thinking and really, really want to get into the nitty gritty with me.
Definitely. And something that, we talk about a lot is social interactions and celebration, and people who, don't enable you to those bad behaviors, but still create meaningful celebratory rituals without alcohol. So we only have 2 minutes left. So I wanted to end on a celebratory note here. How do you create celebratory rituals, or how have your celebratory rituals changed over the past 29 years now?
Well, for anybody, the public me is not any different than the private me. I'm the same person. I'm lucky. My type of television, I just get to be me. I'm not an actor.
Right.
I don't inhabit a role. I am one of the happiest, most celebration-oriented people that I know. I will use any excuse to celebrate. We do it twice a week here in the office in one way or another. I throw dinners. I mean, I entertain a lot. I will, any excuse to celebrate something. First day of something, last day of something, middle of the week, end of the week. Hey, it's Tuesday. But I think in specific, what you're talking about is early on with so many people who use celebrations as an excuse for a lot of unhealthy behavior, uh,
Right.
acting out sexually, uh, over intoxication with whatever your thing is,
Mm-hmm.
uh, gambling. I mean, you can just add a ton of stuff to that list, right?
Whatever it is, right.
Yeah. I mean, look, sex is great. I'm all for it, but that's different than sexualized behavior, acting out in it, or doing something that's hurtful to yourself or others, right?
Right.
And, you know, so many people want to do that. I got a piece of advice early on in my life, or early on in sobriety, from my sober friends and community and my sponsor, that said, if you don't have a reason to be somewhere, leave. And my running joke with people, my
I love that.
sobriety, I mean, I just said this 2 weeks ago to someone. We went to a friend's house for dinner, and we left at 11 o'clock. And this was someone's lake home about an hour outside of the Twin Cities. And there were like 12 people at this dinner event. And I was the only one that left and drove home that night at 11 o'clock. And my friend who has the home, it has many, many, many bedrooms. And it's a big, big old building that they converted into a cabin. And, you know, everyone was staying over because it was easy, but everyone was drinking. And my friend knew what the answer was. We were having lunch with another person who was there who didn't know my story or anything like that. And I said, you know, when the same people that I've known for a long time repeat the same story for the second time that night, it's a signal that my time to go is there. Now, do I, you know, bail out of windows? I have. I've been at parties with people and I'm like, you know, I'm not even going to walk through the room and have to talk to 100 people on my way out of the party. I'm just going up ground floor, going right out the window into my car. That's just called taking care of myself. My friends tell me that I love to leave, and I'm actually a life of the party kind of person.
Not mutually exclusive.
Right. I mean, a good party is fantastic. People drinking socially is fantastic. People getting tipsy is great. Good for them. I've lost that privilege. But there's a moment where it turns into something else. And that's where I leave for myself, because I don't trust me. All these years later, I know that given the right set of circumstances with the right person doing the right thing at the right moment, that how is my disease going to show up? My disease may show up at 1 a.m, in 100 different ways. And I'm just not even going to put myself in that position. So if I don't have a reason to stay there, I go.
Right.
But I am also the person who gets there first. I'm the person that helps out the most. I'm still the one talking the loudest, trying to be I'm still that lunatic that I was at parties when I was younger. I'm just not the guy that closes down the bar.
Right. Right. You can have a good time without being the last one there. And I know, Andrew, we're at time here. Do you have a parting line or the best advice you've ever received that you want to leave the community with?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's so many. I would encourage people to just stay close to whatever it is that's working for them in their lives. But I would add something that I'm not sure that I mentioned earlier. There's been a lot of questions in there in the chat that I haven't had a chance to answer. We didn't cover. We could have talked for hours about this subject. And the thought is this: you can't think your way into right acting. You're not going to change your life sitting there, using an internal dialogue all by yourself. It's just not going to happen. I've never known anyone that can think their way into right acting. It just doesn't happen. But the flip side of the coin is that I can name 100 instances in my life and name check another 1,000 in others because they've shared them with me, and you can hear them all the time when we're sharing stories with other people. You can act your way into right thinking. You can develop new habits. You can, by sharing. If you're a private person who's stuffed all this stuff and kept all these secrets, that's a sickness. That's okay. Start sharing that stuff and it's going to have less power over you. And then your thinking will actually change because you won't be living in that fear-based decision-making. You can't think your way into right acting, but you can act your way into right thinking. And that's maybe the most important thing of all.
That's a great one. Got to write that down or watch this back. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. This has been incredible. I see all of our comments flowing in that are very appreciative. So thank you so much for being here. We hope to, keep in touch as we grow our community and hopefully do this again sometime soon.
Please let me know anything that I can do to help. I think it's wonderful. Recovery has 1,000 different faces. They're all good. And for anyone out there who's currently really struggling, there is a solution. You will find it if you are transparent and open with one other human being. Truly, it does get better.
Thank you. And good night or good morning, wherever you are, to everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.